Thanks for joining us today. And I'm here with Lindsey Pieschel.
Pieschel.
I've never been able to get that right. I don't know why. I'm so glad you're not offended by that.
No, it's a weird spelled name.
Yeah.
Like I would have never have guessed that's what it was before I got
Pieschel.
married. Yeah.
Okay.
I would have probably said Pieschel
Pieschel.
if I would have saw it.
I love your sense of humor. Well, I'm so glad you're joining me today because I'm starting to do these. I'm so excited to hear certain aspects of people that I've never been able to hear. There's questions I've been wanting to ask, and so I'm excited about that. The first question I want to ask you is, I have two questions. One is, okay, tell me a little bit. You're married, yes?
Yes.
To
My husband Chris.
Okay, and you have two children.
2 and a stepchild. Yes. So
And
bonus
a stepchild.
Bonus
That's right.
child.
You have a bonus child too. Is that what you guys call them?
Yeah.
A bonus child.
That's what I call them.
Okay, brothers, sisters.
I have 3 older brothers.
3 older brothers.
Yeah.
Were you the tomboy?
Yes.
Okay. And is both your parents still alive?
Yes.
Okay. Just so people have a little bit, and you live in Hubbard, and okay. What's one thing you do that gives you joy?
Apart from being a parent, I love my job. I love my career. I love working with children.
Yeah.
And that brings me a lot of joy.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But before, I just wanted to talk, as I said, I wanted to hear a little bit of your backstory, because how many years have you been at this church? Like 4 or 5? When did you come?
I can't remember.
How long were you married?
It'll be 8 years this summer, so I feel like I've been here since 2015 or 2016.
Yeah.
It's been a while, yeah.
And I Facebook stalked you a little bit.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm like, okay, I kind of know what happened in your life from about 15, 16 till now. I'm like, okay, yeah, she graduated from college. She's been doing this. You had your new baby. And okay. But there's a gap of about 5 to 6 years that I have no idea, how you met Chris. I have no idea, where your son, how that came in. So tell me, first of all, a little bit how you came to Jesus, because you said earlier he came to you, not you to him.
Yeah. So when I was 3, I remember we had this 90s makeshift bookshelf, like the old cinder blocks and the wood
Oh,
plates,
yes.
Everyone
I
had that in the 90s.
I had those.
So my mom had like all these books on there, and like the medical encyclopedias from like the 70s that she still has today. That cracks me up.
The big binder ones, yeah.
But she had this white Bible. It was really old, and like it was leather, had the gold pages, and
that too.
It was like all cracked and worn. I didn't know what
Ours
it was,
wasn't.
but it had pictures in it. And I remember I would just, I would look through the encyclopedias. Like I particularly liked the S one because I liked looking at the different snakes. But then I would get this Bible out.
You love snakes?
No, not now, no.
Okay.
But I would get this Bible out, and I would always turn to the picture of Jesus on the cross.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know what it was. I was just particularly drawn to that image, and even at 3, like it moved me. Like I didn't know what it was. And then I think I was a little bit older, maybe almost 4. My mom started sending us to Sunday school. There was a neighbor that lived a couple houses down that drove this big yellow van that would come take all the neighborhood kids to Sunday school. Yeah. And it was this Mennonite church.
Okay. And you grew up in this area, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I went to this church, and it was very, it was a really crazy experience. But that's when I finally learned about Jesus.
And what age again were you then?
I was like 3.5, 4.
Wow, you were young. Okay.
Yeah. And, we didn't go very long because it was actually a really scary experience at the same time. But we did go, and I always just had that, from a very young age, I knew who he was. I was called to him. I was just drawn to him. It was just there. And then I started going to church on my own because we lived here in Aurora in town, and I'd walk to the Lutheran church.
Oh,
and just started going to church there.
I didn't know that.
And went there for a couple years, and then I really came like into my faith as an adult
Okay.
was like when I was at, which one was this? This was at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. We were at a night fire range where we were. I just remember this drill sergeant pulling this wood cover off of a foxhole and told us to get in there and make sure that we had our sleeves tucked and our pants tucked into our boots because there was black widows down there.
Oh, I hate spiders. Oh, that was completely involuntary.
So
Oh.
I just remember going, oh, what have I gotten myself into? I was like, I remember being in that hole and just feeling like this overwhelming sense of, protection and like going, there's this presence with me as I'm in this foxhole with spiders in the dark and going, I don't know what my future holds, but I know that I'm safe and that that I'm loved. And it was just that from that day on, like ever since then, I started going to service on Sundays while it was at Fort Bragg.
Okay.
Where I met this, like we had Sunday service, and then after that we would have a Bible study. And we had this chaplain, I will never forget him, and he just related everything, like all the scriptures we talked about, and like we talked about heaven, and he goes, it reminds me of home. And we found out that he also lived in Oregon.
Oh.
So we had this like great connection,
Yeah.
and it was a really good experience.
Wow. Now, you went into the Army after high school, right? But not immediately.
Not immediately.
Okay.
I started college.
Tell me that story.
I started college, didn't really care much about it.
You graduated from high school and tried to go to college.
Wasn't like
Arizona, right?
No, I was going to Shemeketa.
Okay, Shemeketa.
And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no direction, so there was no motivation for me to succeed. And one day, it actually came after I flipped an ATV down the ravine. And I was like getting all the bills in the mail, and I'm like, Life Flight's expensive, by the way.
How bad were you hurt?
I was actually miraculously, after flipping an ATV down a ravine and hitting a tree, I had minor injuries. They thought I had broke my pelvis, but I just had some minor internal bleeding. And
oh my goodness. Okay.
But anyway, that's another story. That was
now was this after you had Kalean?
This is before.
Okay.
And all these bills were coming in, and so I remember one day I'm sitting there. I just finished classes and I didn't register for any more, and I got a phone call. And I was screening calls at the time because, like, they're calling, like, you need to, like, work out a payment plan for all these medical bills you've acquired.
Because it's expensive.
It is.
Oh, my goodness.
20 years. 20.
You were 20? Okay.
And I remember I got this phone call, and they asked to speak to me, and I'm like, can I ask who's calling?
Yeah.
And then he's like, oh, this is Sergeant so-and-so. I'm like, why are you calling me? He was a recruiter.
Okay.
And he's like, have you ever thought about joining the Army? And I'm like, not really. So he goes, you want to come down and talk to me about it? So I did some research that night, and I looked into some things, and I talked to some friends that were also, had gone into the military. And I looked at different careers, and I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. That sounds really cool.
Okay.
So a couple days later, I go to meet this recruiter, and he goes, did you do some research? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, I want to be a psychological operations specialist, 37 Fox. And he goes, why? And so I'm like, because they get to go do all these really cool things, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, you have to have a certain test score to get into this. So you have to score like at this level. And so I'm like, no problem. So I go and I take this test, and
you're so bright.
I come back, and not like they sent like his recruiter, like the senior recruiter came and talked to me at that point, and he goes, have you ever thought about becoming a doctor? And I'm like, no.
So after you took your test, they came back to you and said, you should be a doctor?
Yeah, they wanted me to go into the Army's medical school.
Wow.
And like that was a 20-year commitment, essentially.
Like, no.
Because I'd have to go through all the years of medical school. And
they would have paid for all that.
They would have paid for all of it.
Wow.
But I would have to then serve a certain amount of years after.
Yeah.
As a physician for the military, and I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Not 20 years.
Yeah, it was like somewhere around like 14 or 15 years that I'd have to have that commitment.
Wow. So what did you do in the military?
So psychological operations.
Which is, can you explain that?
So it was a really kind of a fascinating career. It's a lot of psychology, but so like ultimately our role was to go out and work with people in in their respective countries and to build relationships with them, and then to sell them on our plans. So we were using we're building relationships we're with imams or priests or like the people at the radio station or the people that run the TV station, like community leaders. We're building all these relationships, sitting down and having tea with them or eating with them, and then we're so we have those relationships in place so that when it comes time for us to say, hey, this is our goal, we're going to use them to make it think our job is to make them think that it's their idea to do what we want them to do. Our job is to sell them on our operation, make them no, this is what's best for your country, or this is what you guys need to do to make this better.
And this is why you're in our our community outreach here at the church.
So a lot of that is we got to do I worked on product design and development, which was propaganda essentially. Some of the things that we had were school supplies in Iraq.
Yeah.
Where we're giving them the materials so that they can go to school and be successful. We're primarily targeting children so that they don't grow up hating the Americans that are there.
That makes sense.
I remember giving them, we would give them candy and then they'd throw rocks at us.
Oh no!
Because that's what kids do.
That's what kids do.
But
how long were you in the military?
5.5 years.
Wow.
I was 4 months shy of 6 years.
Okay. So what year did you get out?
May of 2011. 2011.
Okay.
Oh, it's been 10 years.
Wow.
That's gone so fast.
Why did you get out 6 months shy?
So toward the end, I had an incident, and so I had an injury, not on the line of duty, unfortunately, because that would have paid for everything, that they had found when they did an MRI that I had a birth defect of the brainstem.
That's where this comes in.
Yeah.
You didn't know that until then?
Mm-mm. I had no idea.
Wow.
I'd always had the symptoms of it, but it was always brushed off as an accident from when I was a kid, saying that it was just residual from that. Can you
give it a very brief description for people who have no clue? They have no idea. I know what you're talking about. So very, very briefly, your brain is...
My brain... So what happens is when the skull is forming, you have soft spots. One of the soft spots is on the back of your head. For me, the platelets on the back of the head fused in utero, so it didn't have the soft spot, so the skull never grew, but the brain continues to grow, which then gets pushed out. So it's getting pushed into the spinal canal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your brain is not just up here, it's down here.
Yeah, it's falling out of my head. I'm literally losing my mind.
I love your humor. Okay, so they figured this out, and you're like, no, you need to get out of the military.
Yeah, they're like, they gave me a month to produce a report from a doctor that I was fit for duty. They wouldn't send me to the military doctor. They told me I had to go get it. I'm like, I can't even get it in a month. It's a specialist. This is back in 2011 when, when I made the appointment for the doctor, it was a 3-month wait.
Wow.
So I didn't get it.
You just had to leave.
Yeah. So they told me that, you're out. And anyway, it's really their way of saying that because you didn't meet your 6 years, we can cut off your benefits is what it was.
So they kind of messed you over a little bit.
Yeah, just a little.
Just a little bit, because you would have stayed.
I would have stayed. I would have finished because I would have been out in 4 months. Anyway.
Right. Would you have left at 6 years?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were planning on leaving anyhow.
Yeah.
It's not like you were going to go another 12 or something like that. So you get out of the military, then what happens?
Oh gosh.
2011.
2011. I started working for a company called Albertina Kerr. And so they do group homes for, in the Portland area, it's all children. So they take the kids that are unmanageable, that the parents can't manage them because of their behavior.
Okay.
Or their, whether they have autism or their fetal alcohol syndrome or whatever, deficits they have that they're unmanageable, and work on them with the group homes. And then in Salem is all adults.
Mm-hmm.
So we got all of the adults that were in that big one. What I can never remember the name of it in Salem. It was like a state hospital, but I can never remember the name.
So there's a hospital in Salem.
But they closed it years ago.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yes, but I don't remember the name of it.
Yeah, it was a big, huge deal with how these people were treated there, and
right, I remember that.
so they all have a degree of PTSD from living there.
Really? I didn't know that.
Years later.
Because I grew up in Dallas, Oregon, so we went to Salem constantly. Yeah, and there's a hospital on the other side of the road, I think, from this.
Yeah, I could.
I think it's where they shot One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
No, they did that at the Oregon State Hospital.
Okay, yes.
No, this one, it's about maybe half-mile away from there.
Yeah, but it's in that general area.
Yeah, it's in that general area. I just could never remember the name of it.
Anyways.
But
so that's where you were working.
I was working there. I stayed there until I got married. So I finished
to Chris?
Yes.
Okay.
So I worked there from 2011 to 2015. I was a program manager for 2 of the homes. So I did all their...
Are you being distracted by
Yes.
Eveyln? We could hear her baby crying out there.
She's tired.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
So you stayed there, and then you started working on your degree somewhere in there.
So I finished my bachelor's degree while I worked there.
Okay.
And then I started a master's degree while I was still working there. And then that's when Chris and I got married in July of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I started actually a master's of education. And I was like, I kind of like, I always wanted to be a teacher until I started doing the classroom observations.
You went, nope.
And I'm like, man, kids are awful.
They are awful.
I couldn't do it. I was like, no.
So instead, you wanted to be involved with autistic children.
I kind of just fell into that.
Yeah. So yeah, why them? It feels like that's a calling.
It is. I don't know. Like having spent time with, so at Albertina Kerr in Salem, we had one home that was a group home for boys that were all about 11 to 17.
Okay.
And there was one kid there that, bless his heart, he's the one that kind of drove me into that field. And it was watching him go from a 13-year-old to an 18-year-old in that time. And his challenges and like watching him overcome it, to where when I first started working with him, it was restraint after restraint to keep him safe and keep the other boys safe. And he just blossomed like with the staff and the structure to where he graduated high school and he was in JROTC.
Really?
I'm like,
that's rewarding.
It was, I'll probably never see him again. He's an adult. He's he's in his early 20s now. Mm-hmm. But I hope he was able to go into the military like he wanted to. Mm-hmm. Because that would be really fantastic for him. He needs that direction.
He needs structure.
He needs that structure, like do this, and he'll be good.
Yeah.
But, like looking at, he was fetal alcohol syndrome, and I think he was diagnosed as on the spectrum. And I just remember, doing research and looking at like, what are the services? Like, what are the things that would really help kids like him? And that's when I kind of just came into ABA, and then I talked to someone at Arizona State.
Okay, that's where that goes.
And then they didn't actually have the program at the time. Mm-hmm. So then I went to Capella in Minnesota, and so I did my degree online.
There you go. Okay.
And then I picked up a second master's degree at Arizona State afterwards, which was giving me my master's of education on top of the psychology degree.
And this was all while you were working in Salem?
Yes.
Yeah. You had one son.
Yes.
Okay. So when did he come in at all of this?
He was born in 2007, and that was
just out of high school?
No, that was a couple years out of high school.
But before you went to the military?
No, it was while I was in the military.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. But I had him while I was in the military.
Okay.
So he was a little bit of an army brat for a little while.
Okay. And he just seems to have been your the center of your world when he was younger.
Yes.
Yeah. And now you have another baby, Evelyn.
Yes.
And how is it different having a child at this? I'm going to say this weirdly, at this age, because you were quite young at that point, and you're still young, but there's 13-year gap,
14.
14-year gap. That's what's different this time? What have you learned over these years that you're like, this is different?
Definitely, I have a lot more patience.
Yeah,
that comes with age.
Yes, it does.
And I just find like your values have changed over the between your early 20s and your mid 30s. Your values change, and priorities are definitely different. Like when Kalean was born, he was my number one priority. Like putting myself through college, so that I could support him better.
I love the fake pictures of you two when he was young.
And just like all the different things, I always tried to teach him the right way,
right,
but I had to work a lot too, so I feel like I missed a lot more of him when he was little, but I always tried to make up for that. Now it's in my where I'm at in life now is like a completely different place.
So you're able to really spend the time that you want with her. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that you've got? You're like, okay. What about something you forgot? How hard it was?
Getting up in the middle of the night. Kalean was such an easy baby. Like she's really easy too, but he was about 7 or 8 weeks old when he started sleeping through the night. He slept about 11 to 7 is what it was every night.
That's nice.
And I just remember the first time, like, when I woke up and I'm like, did I sleep through him waking up? Like, that panicky feeling and like going to check on him. He's still sleeping. I'm like, oh Lord, how did this happen? He slept through the night and it just stuck.
That's huge.
She was probably a good 4 months old by the time she slept 6 hours.
And that first time you're like, oh, 4 hours is a big deal. When you can finally I remember that when we had twins. We had twins. Those of you who don't know, we have twins, and the boys they were up every 2 hours, and so there would be nights where you would not get 4 hours of sleep consecutively. Man, you just can't function on that. You gotta have
Red Bull.
Yeah, and Kathy doesn't do caffeine at all, so I don't know how she did it. I did. I had so much coffee.
Vitamin B6. That'll do it too.
But she's such a happy baby. So. All right. So that's what you. So then you left your job there, and you. How did you meet Chris?
So Chris, when I was in high school, was my boss.
Oh, he was your boss?
Yes.
You had a job in high school.
I went to work at McDonald's in Wilsonville when I was 17.
Okay.
And he was the assistant manager there.
Okay.
So we worked a lot together.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand him.
I'm sure he knows this.
Oh, yeah. We still joke about it.
So you couldn't stand him.
No.
And then you guys kind of separated.
So he left about 6-7 months after I started working there. He left to go be a store manager at another store.
Okay.
Didn't see him for many years, maybe a year or two, and that's when MySpace came out.
Okay, yes.
And so my friend, she was like, oh, you got to have one of these. And so I set it up, and the very first person that found me was him.
Huh.
And so I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. I'm like, okay. So we started talking, and I was 19 and he was, in his, early 20s, and we kind of went out a couple times, didn't go anywhere. Then we stopped talking for a couple years.
Huh.
And then we started just running into each other all the time. And we're like, oh, we should hang out. And it took, a good 10 years.
10 years. Wow.
Of persistence.
But you guys became friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one day it just was clear that you need to marry this guy, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
And now you're a beaver, right?
Yes.
And he's a duck. How does that work?
Well, I'll always root for the Beavers to beat the Ducks, obviously.
Obviously.
But I also will root for the Ducks to win because I don't want to put up with pouting. He used to be so bad that, like, if they messed up, he'd be throwing his hat, yelling at the TV, and I'm like, oh, gosh.
Oh,
like,
my
act
goodness.
like you're on the team.
Did he go to U of O?
No.
No, I hear a lot of people I know who are diehard Duck fans and didn't go there. Now, you didn't go to OSU either, did you?
Mm-mm.
See, I went to OSU, so I have a reason to vote for, cheer for OI, but yeah, I just know there's some households where that can get really...
My dad went to OSU, and he's always like, you always got to root for the underdogs. And so it just kind of started from a very young age. We were just a Beaver house.
You're just a Beaver house. It's a Beaver house. Okay, one last question I got. Would you say that you've always practiced your faith or not? Because one of the things that's interesting about your life is you clearly are a Christian. You don't hide your faith at all. And yet you still have a lot of friends who don't seem to be believers at all. How do you manage that? Because there's a lot of Christians who, after a little while, they only have Christian friends, and you don't. So what's the secret?
I don't know. I feel like a good majority of my friends are believers. Like, there's a select few that aren't, but it's not something that, like, we generally talk about. Like,
it's just not a big deal.
It's not a big deal to them that I'm a believer, and obviously, they know who I am. They know that I'm a believer and that I do things for reasons. Yeah. And I'll be like, I was really moved by this, or I'll just make references to things, or if you look at it from this frame point.
Yeah.
And they're like, huh.
And they don't feel judged at all by you, do they? No. Yeah, and you have fun with them, and I think some Christians. Why do you think some Christians struggle with non-Christians, or non-Christians struggle with Christians? Maybe that's a better word.
I think it'd actually be the same reason for both. It's like when it's like a tunnel vision.
Yeah. When
you're blinded, like you're trying to live that absolute perfect Christian life, like you're trying to just be perfect, and like I guess that'd be like the word to use. Like you're just trying to be that person that the non-believers think Christians are. Like it's like that same tunnel vision. Like non-believers that are harder on Christians are the ones that think that Christians have to be these ultimately perfect people that
which they're not.
They're not. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, I make mistakes. I mess up.
You're very honest about that, aren't you? Yeah.
But that's part of like your faith is like knowing that you can't be perfect.
That's right.
And there's no way to live a sinless life. Like it's just owning it, going, try to do better next time. And
that's it.
That's it. But then there's those people that can't see it that way, that are like, I have to be this person. I have to be this image of this Christian. And then the non-believers that have that same thing, like, well, you're not a very good Christian. I'm like, no, I'm actually really am, because I know that I make mistakes and I'll admit it.
And you'll admit, and that's all it takes.
Yeah.
So, was there a question you wished I asked?
No, I don't know.
Is there one you wish I hadn't asked? Okay.
I'm an open book.
You are an open book. And I appreciate you. I love having your kids here. Evelyn, we can still hear her cry. But yeah, you're just such a joy. And I love your little sense of humor. It's just quirky, and I like that. So thanks for joining me today. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
All right. Thanks for everybody. We'll talk to you next time.